When a Hanseatic merchant ship entered the harbor of Bergen, the ship was usually the first thing people noticed. Its square sail came down, ropes were thrown toward the quay. Sailors moved across the wet deck as sacks of grain, flour, and malt were lifted ashore. The hold would soon be emptied and filled again with stockfish, fish oil, animal hides, and other goods from northern Norway. Several months later, those products would reach Lubeck, London, Bruges, and markets far inside continental Europe. In the traditional story of medieval commerce, the wealth seems to belong to the ship. The larger the vessel, the more cargo it can carry. The farther the route, the greater the potential difference between buying and selling prices. If a ship carries inexpensive grain into a part of Norway that lacks reliable cereal supplies, then returns with valuable dried cod for European consumers, it appears to be a money-making machine moving across the sea. The warehouses beside the harbor look much less impressive. They do not raise sails. They do not cross storms. They rarely appear at the center of paintings celebrating a city's maritime power. Once the goods have been carried inside, the building simply remains where it is, waiting for the next merchant, the next ship, and the next market price. But Hanseatic merchants of the 14th and 15th centuries understood that lasting wealth was not necessarily created on the day a vessel left. It was created after the goods entered a warehouse, when the merchant gained the power to decide how long they could wait and when they would leave. On the eastern side of Bergen Harbor stood a commercial district made up of long, narrow timber buildings. This was Bryggen. During the middle of the 14th century, Hanseatic merchants established a formal trading office there. It became one of the four principal Hanseatic kontorer overseas, alongside London, Bruges, and Novgorod. German merchants lived there, stored merchandise, managed account books, and organized the exchange of stockfish for grain and other imports. Bryggen gradually became the concentrated center of Hanseatic activity in Bergen. At its height, as many as 2,000 German merchants, clerks, journeymen, and apprentices may have lived or worked there. The first things visible at Bryggen were the gabled fronts facing the harbor. Behind each frontage, a row of buildings extended inland along a narrow passage, like a long wooden box pushed into the city from the waterfront. The rooms closest to the quay were used to receive customers, inspect deliveries, and manage accounts. Storage spaces occupied the middle sections. Farther behind them stood meeting halls, kitchens, and stone-built storage rooms. The stone rooms were used for especially valuable goods or merchandise that required better protection from fire, because most of the surrounding buildings were made of timber. This was not merely a building in which goods were piled up. It combined housing, offices, commodity inspection, credit management, and inventory control inside one long commercial property. A merchant from Lubeck could sleep upstairs, examine account books below, pass through several doorways to inspect stockfish, and then walk to the quay to meet a newly arrived ship from the north. The goods might leave his immediate sight. They did not leave his control. This was the fundamental difference between a warehouse and a merchant ship. The value of a ship came from movement. The value of a warehouse came from stopping movement. A vessel needed to leave port as soon as possible so that it could begin another voyage. A warehouse could turn waiting itself into a commercial tool. The principal exchange managed by the Hanseatic merchants of Bergen was relatively clear. They brought grain, flour, malt, beer, and fishing supplies from the Baltic and northern Germany. In return, they acquired Norwegian stockfish, fish oil, animal hides, and other northern products. Northern Norway lacked a reliable domestic supply of grain. European cities, monasteries, and religious markets had a continuing demand for fish that could be transported and stored for long periods. Stockfish was particularly well suited to this system. Cod was hung on wooden racks during cold and dry seasons and cured by wind and air rather than by large quantities of salt. Once much of its water had been removed, the fish weighed far less than it had when fresh while retaining considerable nutritional value. As long as it remained dry, stockfish could be kept for years. Good quality dried fish may have remained edible for at least 5 years. By the 14th century, stockfish may have represented more than 4/5 of the monetary value of Norway's exports. The goods inside the warehouse were therefore not fresh fish that had to be sold within 3 days. They were commodities capable of waiting. A few weeks of storage did not immediately destroy their value. If one ship departed without taking them, they could remain for another vessel. If prices in London, Lubeck, or Bruges improved, waiting might make them more valuable. But stockfish did not sell at one uniform price merely because it had avoided decay. Hanseatic traders in Bergen developed a highly detailed grading system. Experienced inspectors examined the size, shape, color, dryness, texture, and smell of the fish before assigning them to different commercial categories. Within the Bergen Hanseatic system, stockfish could be divided into as many as 24 quality grades. Before inspection, a fish entering the warehouse was simply dried cod brought south by a northern producer. After grading, sorting, and rebundling, it became a more standardized commodity with a clearer price and a quality that distant buyers could more readily trust. The warehouse did not merely preserve value, it helped create value. The best fish could be sent to demanding markets where customers were prepared to pay more. Harder, smaller, or less attractive fish could be sold to different wholesalers. Goods from different regions, years, and quality levels no longer had to be treated as one undifferentiated pile. A merchant could tell a buyer that he was not offering merely some fish. He was selling a particular grade that had already been examined in Bergen. This reduced uncertainty for the buyer. It also strengthened the bargaining position of the people who controlled the grading rules. The ship alone could not perform this function. Its hold transported merchandise from one port to another. The warehouse, the inspectors, and the account books transformed a collection of unequal fish into organized commercial inventory that could be priced by grade. The warehouse solved another problem as well. Fish and grain did not necessarily arrive in Bergen on the same day. Northern fishermen and regional traders delivered large quantities of stockfish during particular seasons. Ships carrying grain from Lübeck, Rostock, or Wismar depended on wind, harbor conditions, political conflict, and the limits of the sailing season. Without warehouses, buyers, sellers, and ships would all need to appear at the quay at the same time. If any one of them arrived late, the exchange might fail. Storage separated these moments. Grain could reach Bergen first and wait for the fish. Stockfish could be purchased first and wait for the next southbound vessel. One cargo could enter without another cargo immediately leaving. The warehouse transformed an exchange that would otherwise have needed to occur instantly on the waterfront into a transaction that could be completed gradually over several months. This gave permanent Hanseatic residents in Bergen an important advantage. Some early German merchants visited the city only during the summer sailing season. Others remained through the winter. These resident merchants could purchase stockfish throughout the year, hold imported commodities, and organize exports as soon as the next navigation season began. They could also provide goods, information, storage, and commercial contacts to visiting merchants who arrived only in summer. A ship might complete only one major round voyage in a year. The warehouse continued working after the vessel had departed. Clerks inspected fish. Bookkeepers examined debts. Merchants supplied imported grain to new producers. Another consignment of stockfish entered the building. One motionless property could connect the cargoes of the previous voyage, the present season, and the next departure. What made this system truly powerful was credit. A fisherman or trader arriving from northern Norway did not necessarily possess enough coin to purchase grain, flour, beer, cloth, fishing equipment, and other supplies. A Hanseatic merchant could provide these goods in advance. The account would not be settled immediately. The debt was entered into the merchant's books. The fisherman then returned north and continued working. During the following season, he delivered stockfish to repay what he owed. This arrangement gave producers access to imported necessities and provided them with a predictable buyer. It could also bind them to the same Hanseatic merchant over many years. A debtor was generally expected to deliver future fish to the trader who had advanced the grain and supplies rather than choosing a competitor offering a better price at the last moment. From the fisherman's side, this was early access to essential goods. From the Hanseatic merchant side, it was advanced control of inventory. The grain and beer stored in the warehouse were not simply merchandise waiting to be sold. They could be converted into claims on future fish. A merchant might release 10 marks worth of grain today. In return, he did not receive coins immediately. He received an obligation to deliver stockfish during the next season. If the catch was good, he had secured a stable supply. If European fish prices rose, he already controlled part of the future stock. If competitors arrived in Bergen, he could point out that the fish produced by certain debtors had already been claimed through existing obligations. The warehouse therefore created a second kind of stability that the merchant ship could not provide. It did not merely protect goods that already existed. Through credit, it helped control goods that had not yet been caught. Credit introduced new risks. The fisherman might encounter bad weather. His boat might be damaged. The expected shoals of cod might not appear. A debtor might die or deliver fish of lower quality than promised. A line in an account book stating that stockfish was owed did not mean the physical goods were already inside the warehouse. The Hanseatic contour had to regulate these relationships. It needed to limit competition among merchants for indebted clients and decide what should happen when a producer failed to deliver. The debt might be extended. The terms might be renegotiated. Political or legal pressure might be used to enforce payment. The relative stability of warehouse commerce did not come from an absence of risk. It came from dividing risk into smaller pieces. One merchant could extend credit to dozens of different producers. The failure of one debtor would not destroy the entire investment in the way that the sinking of a fully loaded ship could. A decline in the quality of one consignment could be offset by other deliveries. If one buyer delayed payment, the physical inventory might still remain in storage. The risks of the merchant ship were much more concentrated. Once a vessel left harbor, its hull, crew, and most of its cargo were exposed to the same storm, the same rocks, and the same attackers. Hanseatic commerce made extensive use of a single-masted, square-sailed cargo ship commonly known as the cog. The cog could transport a relatively large quantity of merchandise with a comparatively small crew. It became one of the important tools of Hanseatic maritime expansion. A smaller crew reduced daily wage costs. A large hold allowed the expenses of the voyage to be spread across more merchandise, but a larger ship also concentrated more capital inside one wooden hull. If the sail tore, the entire cargo was delayed. If the hull leaked, grain, beer, cloth, and other goods could be damaged together. If armed attackers seized the vessel, the loss was not limited to one bundle of fish. In 1476, the Hanseatic cities complained to the English king that merchants from Bristol had previously seized a vessel and a cargo of fish near Iceland, with a claimed total value of £2,000. Whether the other side accepted that valuation in full is less important than what the claim reveals. One maritime incident could transform an enormous amount of merchandise into a disputed loss that might take years to recover. Complaints involving seizure, piracy, and confiscation repeatedly appeared in relations between English and Hanseatic merchants during the 14th and 15th centuries. For traders crossing the North Sea and Baltic, armed violence, detention of vessels, and the removal of cargo were not dangers confined to legends. Natural hazards were equally real. Archaeological studies of medieval wrecks along the coast of southern Norway show that Hanseatic vessels heading toward Bergen had to pass exposed coastlines and complicated approaches to harbor. Storms, navigational mistakes, rocks, and even conflicts within the harbor could destroy a ship that had almost reached its destination. A merchant vessel had to complete the voyage safely before anyone could begin discussing profit. A warehouse did not need to survive the Skagerrak every year in order to continue existing. Ships also faced another problem that is easy to overlook. They created value only when they were moving or preparing to move. A vessel waiting in harbor for cargo still required crew, food, maintenance, and anchorage. Suppose a ship arrived from Lübeck, filled with grain but could not find enough stockfish for the return journey. It could not simply turn itself into a free warehouse. The crew continued eating. The favorable weather window was narrowing. Another voyage may already have been scheduled. The shipowner had to choose between continuing to wait, lowering freight charges, accepting less valuable cargo, or returning with empty space. The warehouse faced the opposite situation. It could wait. As long as the merchandise remained dry, avoided fire, and did not suffer a permanent market collapse, time was not necessarily an enemy. For durable goods, such as stockfish, delay could improve the merchant's bargaining position. When fishermen arriving from the north urgently needed grain, the warehouse's cereal inventory became especially valuable. When space on a southbound vessel was scarce, stockfish that had already been graded, bundled, and documented could be loaded quickly. When European markets were temporarily oversupplied, a merchant could postpone the sale instead of accepting the first low price offered on the quay. This is what it really meant for a warehouse to generate more stable profits. The return did not always appear as a clear storage fee charged every day. Many Hanseatic merchants stored goods that belonged to themselves, their trading partnerships, their commercial houses, or their indebted clients. The warehouse produced value across several different stages. It allowed the merchant to buy early at a lower price. It allowed him to wait for a better moment to sell. It allowed different quality grades to be directed toward different markets. It allowed him to extend credit to fishermen and secure future supplies. It also allowed him to provide merchandise to visiting traders who had arrived without enough inventory of their own. A ship moved goods from one market to another. A warehouse could earn from time, quality, credit, and information simultaneously. We can now construct two representative models for a 15th century Hanseatic merchant operating in Bergen. These are not complete surviving annual accounts belonging to one historical trader. Real merchants dealt in different goods, under different lease arrangements, through different partnerships and prices. The model simply begins with 100 Lübeck marks of capital and compares two strategies. In the first, the merchant commits most of the money to a single shipping venture. In the second, he commits it to a trading network centered on a brigand warehouse. Begin with the merchant ship. The trader uses 100 marks to purchase grain, beer, and other imports, and to cover his ship share, freight, crew, loading, and voyage-related costs. In a strong year, the vessel reaches Bergen on time. The imported goods sell well. The return hold is filled with high-quality stockfish. There is no serious damage at sea, and the market in Lübeck is willing to pay a favorable price. After all the cargo is sold, the merchant recovers 140 marks. Roughly 20 marks are consumed by sailing, handling, personnel, and other direct expenses. The venture leaves 20 marks of profit. This is an excellent voyage. Its result appears quickly. Grain that had been in Lübeck only months earlier has become stockfish and then a larger quantity of coin. This is the attraction of the merchant ship. One successful round trip can produce a visible increase in wealth. An ordinary year looks different. Adverse winds delay the vessel. The grain still sells, but not at the best price. By the time the ship reaches Bergen, resident merchants have already purchased much of the highest grade stockfish. The return hold is not completely filled. When the cargo reaches Lübeck, market prices are only average. The merchant recovers 120 marks. The 20 marks of voyage expenses still exist. An entire year of risk has produced almost no cash surplus. The ship returned safely. The crew performed its work. The cargo was not destroyed. But in terms of capital return, the money has merely traveled across the sea and back. In a weak year, the ship encounters a storm along the Norwegian coast. Some of the grain becomes wet. Several barrels of beer break open. To prevent further flooding and stabilize the vessel, the crew throws part of the cargo overboard. The ship survives, but the remaining cargo and recoverable goods are worth only 50 marks. The costs of the voyage have already been paid. The original 100 marks may have fallen to approximately 30. An accident that does not completely destroy the vessel can still consume the profits of many ordinary years. Maritime law attempted to distribute certain losses through the principle of general average. When cargo was deliberately thrown overboard to save the ship, the cost could be shared among ship owners and cargo owners, but dividing the loss did not make it disappear. It only determined how much of it each participant had to bear. Shipwreck, jettison, and collision were among the most frequent and complicated maritime disputes faced by northern European towns. Now consider the warehouse-centered model. The merchant again invests 100 marks. This time, he does not place all of the goods inside one ship. Part of the capital purchases grain, flour, malt, and beer for storage. Part is used to extend credit to several northern traders. Part pays for warehouse space, clerks, inspection, handling, and contour expenses. The remaining cash is held in reserve so that the merchant can buy quickly when a large quantity of stockfish arrives. In a strong year, the northern catch is abundant. Debtors who previously received grain deliver stockfish on time. Imported goods stored in the warehouse also sell quickly. The merchant grades the fish. The best stock is sold to buyers willing to pay a premium. Ordinary grades are loaded onto another ship heading toward northern Germany. Total sales and debt recovery reach 142 marks. Warehouse maintenance, employees, handling, inspection, spoilage, and contour fees consume approximately 20 marks. The merchant retains 22 marks. The result is similar to the 20 marks earned by the successful shipping venture. The source of the profit, however, is different. It does not depend on the success of one vessel. It comes from dozens of customers, several consignments, and multiple movements of goods. If one transport ship is delayed, the warehouse's entire commercial operation does not stop. In an ordinary year, the catch is moderate. Several debtors delay delivery. European stockfish prices do not rise significantly. The total value recovered and sold reaches 128 marks. Operating expenses remain close to 20. The merchant retains 8 marks. This is not an exciting return, but it is more stable than the shipping model's ordinary year, which left almost nothing. The reason is not that warehouses are free to operate, it is that the merchant can adjust the timing. Fish that cannot obtain a good price can remain in storage. Grain can still be sold to local clients. The delay of one debtor does not prevent another from delivering. Buying, transportation, and sale do not all need to occur on the same day. In a weak year, the northern catch falls. Several clients fail to repay on schedule. Part of the fish becomes damp and must be downgraded. Market prices are also disappointing. The merchant ultimately recovers only 106 marks. Warehouse, employee, handling, and contour expenses still reach 18 marks. The year produces a loss of 12 marks. The warehouse has not magically transformed a bad year into a profitable one, but compared with the shipping venture's possible loss of 70 marks, much more capital remains intact. The building still exists. The customer relationships still exist. Some grain and stockfish remain in inventory. When the next season begins, the merchant still has the ability to continue operating. This is the difference between stability and maximum return. A merchant ship can produce a more dramatic gain from a single successful voyage. The warehouse is better at preventing one event from destroying the entire business. Brigands' warehouses were not risk-free vaults. Their greatest enemy was fire. The narrow timber buildings contained stockfish, wooden barrels, rope, cloth, and other dry goods. A single spark could move rapidly through connected roofs and passages. Brigand was destroyed by major fires several times and repeatedly rebuilt along the traditional pattern. Most of the buildings standing today reflect construction after the Great Fire of 1702, but the narrow commercial layout, established in the Middle Ages, remains visible. To reduce the danger, open flames were heavily restricted inside brigands' timber buildings. Merchants, clerks, and apprentices went to separate communal halls and kitchens to cook and warm themselves. Valuable goods were placed, where possible, inside more fire-resistant stone storage rooms at the rear. Even with these precautions, one fire could destroy several warehouses at once. The warehouse was stable only in comparison with maritime transport. It still faced fire, damp, rats, decay, theft, and falling prices. Stockfish could last for years only if it remained dry. Once seawater, rain, or ground moisture reached it, even a durable commodity could lose quality quickly. Warehouse management did not mean locking the door and waiting for prices to rise. Workers had to inspect the air, roof, stacking arrangement, and ventilation. Clerks and laborers moved the fish, checked its smell, and separated damp pieces. If inferior fish were mixed into a premium grade, the merchant might gain slightly in the short term. Over time, he would damage trust in the Bergen grading system. Hanseatic merchants could sell stock fish to distant customers not only because they owned ships. Buyers in London or Lubeck believed that merchandise carrying a particular Bergen grade would broadly match the promised standard. The warehouse protected more than goods. It protected the market's confidence in the names used to describe those goods. The contour system strengthened this stability. The Hanseatic office possessed its own administrators, rules, courts, seals, and common funds. It used internal discipline to regulate the conduct of its members. It helped settle disputes and represented the merchants in negotiations with the Norwegian crown and other residents of Bergen. The Contour was not a modern corporation. It provided many independent merchants with a shared legal and political foundation. A merchant arriving alone in an unfamiliar port would need to find an interpreter, warehouse, inspector, guarantor, and court inside the brigand system. Much of that structure already existed. He did not need to prove his origins and reputation from the beginning in every transaction. Nor did he have to negotiate every commercial right with local officials by himself. The institution did not necessarily lower the purchase price of fish. It reduced the invisible costs surrounding each transaction. Which producer deserved credit? Which shipmaster was reliable? Which stock fish grade was suitable for London? Did one debtor already owe goods to another trading house? When was the next Lubeck vessel expected? Which route had recently suffered attacks? Information of this kind circulated through the contour, warehouses, offices, and communal halls. The captain understood the wind at sea. The resident warehouse merchant understood the wind in the market. This gave him a broader view than a trader completing only one voyage. He knew how much grain northern suppliers owed. He knew how many bundles of each fish grade remained in storage. He knew which cargo spaces had already been reserved. He also knew when another consignment might reach a distant market. If he learned that inventories were rising in London, he could reduce shipments of premium fish to England. If Lubeck faced a shortage, he could load vessels earlier. If fish prices declined, he could delay sales while continuing to earn from grain, credit relationships, and other transactions. Information made the warehouse more valuable than its timber walls. This also explains why successful Hanseatic merchants rarely limited themselves to being simple ship owners. Owning only a vessel meant that income depended on freight rates, cargo utilization, and safe passage. Owning only stockfish meant that income depended on the difference between purchase and selling prices. Once a merchant controlled storage and trading relationships, he could participate in several stages at once. He could supply grain to fishermen. He could claim future fish through credit. He could grade the catch. He could choose the time of sale. He could supply goods to visiting merchants. He could own shares in several different ships. He could also invest accumulated cash in houses, land, and other commercial activities in Lubeck. A characteristic of Hanseatic commerce was that merchants did not usually operate as one enormous unified company. They participated simultaneously in multiple partnerships and independent transactions. Their money was spread across different commodities, partners, destinations, and routes. The warehouse stood at the center of these dispersed investments. If one ship sank, one investment disappeared. Other goods, debts, and commercial relationships stored around the warehouse could survive. If prices fell in one market, the merchant could redirect a quality grade toward another destination. Lasting wealth did not come from being correct every time. It came from retaining the ability to trade again after a mistake. The warehouse system could also harm producers. Credit allowed northern fishermen to obtain grain before the next catch. It could also remove their freedom to choose a buyer. Hanseatic merchants controlled grading, accounts, and information from distant markets. The fisherman knew how many fish he had delivered and how much merchandise he was still said to owe. He did not necessarily know the full value of the fish in Lubeck, London, or Bruges. If the merchant assigned the catch a lower grade while leaving the debt unchanged, the producer had little ability to judge whether the exchange was fair. Part of the warehouse's stable return came from unequal access to information at both ends of the trade. Northern producers needed grain. Southern consumers needed fish. The warehouse merchant stood between them. He knew prices on both sides and did not need to reveal everything he knew to either one. The greater stability of the warehouse was therefore not merely an architectural advantage, it was an advantage of position and control. The ship transported goods from one market to another. The warehouse decided when the goods became saleable commodities, which quality category they belonged to, which debt they repaid, and which ship should eventually carry them. In a strong year, both the merchant ship and the warehouse could earn money. The ship relied on full cargo space and favorable winds to produce a high return. The warehouse relied on abundant inventory and rapid turnover to accumulate a surplus. In an ordinary year, the difference became clearer. The ship's fixed voyage costs quickly consumed a smaller price margin. The warehouse could extend storage, redirect grades, and wait for another buyer. In a weak year, the difference was greatest. A storm or seizure could destroy the capital concentrated inside one vessel. A warehouse could also suffer losses, but the failure of one debtor, one damaged consignment, or one delayed ship did not usually remove its entire ability to continue trading. A capable Hanseatic merchant would not choose only between ships and warehouses. He needed ships to connect price differences across markets. He also needed warehouses so that he did not have to accept whatever price existed on the day a vessel arrived. Shipping created the opportunity. Inventory made the opportunity last longer than a single moment. The answer, then, is not that a warehouse always earned more than a merchant ship. In the best years, a successfully returning vessel might generate a return far higher than ordinary storage and trading operations. But that return first had to survive storms, rocks, seizure, empty cargo space, and changes in market prices. Warehouse gains were usually less dramatic. They came from small advantages repeated many times. Buying earlier, selling later, grading more accurately, securing a more reliable supply, allowing the same grain first to create sales revenue, then a credit relationship, and finally a future delivery of stockfish, allowing the same building to function as warehouse, office, residence, and information center. When we look again at Bergen Harbor, the merchant ship remains the most visible object. Its sail shows that the goods came from far away. The sailors on its deck show that someone risked crossing the sea. But whether those goods become lasting wealth may depend on what happens after they are lifted onto the quay and carried through a warehouse door. The merchant ship earns from one voyage. The warehouse earns from many voyages passing in front of it. The ship sells movement. The warehouse manages waiting.